On the day of the German Grand Prix, Belarus, whose name was usually at the time anglicised as Bielorussia, became the latest Soviet republic to declare its sovereignty. As with others, it was a step short of actually breaking away from the USSR, but it asserted the primacy of its own institutions and legislation over that of Moscow. On the 2nd of August, Iraqi troops crossed the Kuwaiti border with 4 divisions, 2 armoured and 2 mechanised, of the elite Republican Guard leading the way, supported by helicopter-borne and amphibious assaults by commandos on Kuwait City itself. Despite the months of threats and build-up, the Kuwaiti defences were caught on the hop, though a delay in Iraqi air operations meant that the Kuwaiti Air Force was able to use its American A-4 Skyhawks, the same aircraft the Argentines had employed so effectively in the Falklands, to attack the advancing tanks before being forced to withdraw into Saudi Arabia. By the end of the following day, the 3rd of August, organised resistance had effectively ended and the Iraqi army began its occupation, with initial orders to use a soft touch. Kuwait had, according to Iraqi propaganda, after all been liberated and restored to its rightful place within Iraq. Cars had their licence plates replaced with Iraqi ones, and Iraqi currency was introduced, with a system of checkpoints set up to control population movements, and Kuwait was formally annexed on the 8th of August. An emergency session of the UN Security Council met in the meantime and ordered a global trade embargo on Iraq, followed on the 7th of August by President Bush ordering US aircraft and ground troops to Saudi Arabia to prevent a further attack, and 3 days later, 10 other Arab states led by Egypt and Syria also voted to send troops to defend Saudi Arabia, which would also serve to send Saddam a signal that he would find no support from his other Arab neighbours. Almost unnoticed among the international shock over the invasion of Kuwait, the South African government met with the African National Congress at the President's official residence, Groote Schuur, to start talking about how to dismantle apartheid and move to majority rule without the country descending into chaos and violence. The end result of this initial meeting was the Groote Schuur Minute, declaring that before full negotiations began, political prisoners would be freed and exiles allowed to return. However, there was still plenty of violence around, which erupted on the day of the Hungarian Grand Prix, as primarily Xhosa supporters of the Inkatha Freedom Party and primarily Zulu supporters of the ANC clashed, leaving 500 dead by the end of the month. Also on Grand Prix Day, paleontologists in South Dakota were just packing up to leave, after successfully finding some Edmontosaurus bones, when the truck got a flat tyre. While that was being sorted out, one of the party, Sue Hendrickson, decided to walk around a bit of the site they hadn't looked at, and found some bones, some on the ground, but more sticking out of the cliff overhead. It was quickly established that the bones were from a Tyrannosaurus rex, and as the skeleton was excavated and more plaster of Paris hurriedly ordered in, it became clear that it was the most complete T-Rex skeleton ever found, in excellent condition. The bones were immediately taken to the Black Hills Institute for Cleaning and Preservation, and almost as quickly became the subject of an ownership dispute, with the owner of the land, a member of the Sioux Nation, claiming the $5,000 he had been paid was merely for permission to remove the bones, not an outright purchase of the bones. The case went on for years, including the FBI seizing the bones at one point, but the landowner was eventually granted ownership, and sold the bones at auction for a record $8.3 million to the Field Museum in Chicago, where Sue remains a permanent exhibit. And so to Hungary, where a lot had changed since last year when Nigel Mansell pulled off his spectacular pass on Senna to win. Still his most recent victory. In the summer of 1989, the country was in a ferment, with East German refugees heading into the west and the nation half expecting Soviet tanks to roll in any day. Now, even the most reform-minded communists were gone from government, and while there were still some 100,000 Soviet troops stationed in the country, they had started leaving in March. It would just take a while to get them all out on trains through the short Hungarian-Ukrainian border at Zahony. The future of the Hungarian Grand Prix was looking rosy, though, with a new 5-year contract signed, but the futures of 2 long-standing British teams were looking distinctly bleak. R.J. Reynolds had announced that, as widely rumoured, their camel brand would not be sponsoring Lotus in 1991, but would instead be supporting both the Williams and Benetton teams. And Brabham had been locked out of their factory for a few days midweek over alleged rent arrears, with Japanese owners Middlebridge in financial trouble themselves. After McLaren's demonstration run at Hockenheim, Ferrari had moved up the introduction of their new Evolution engine, but otherwise all was pretty much as it had been in Germany as pre-qualifying got underway. And it was an all-Franco-Italian affair, as the two Ligiers of Larini and Alio qualified comfortably ahead, for just the second time in 1990, of both AGSs. Guillard was just 2/10ths off, and only 1/10 ahead of Gachot in the much-improved Coloni, with Moreno slowest of the genuine contenders, Langers another 2 seconds adrift, and Giacomelli doing his usual 5 laps before the Life W12 went bang. Friday qualifying saw Alazi go third behind Berger and Mansell, and great things were expected of the young French prodigy on the tight confines of the track, while JJ Leto failed to set a time after the team, not as it transpired for the first time this year, had installed his differential back to front. Saturday saw most drivers improve on their Friday times as the track cleaned up, and in the end it was Thierry Boutsen who had his first pole position, with Riccardo Patrese alongside, the first Williams front row lockout since Spain '87, and the first time all year that there had been no McLaren on the front row. Berger and Senna were on row 2, the Austrian one of only 2 drivers not to improve on Friday's time, while his Brazilian teammate messed up his best lap with a minor off, and ended up 4th. A few days after his 37th birthday, Mansell started back in 5th alongside Alazi, then Nannini and Prost on row 4. Piquet was 9th in the other Benetton, alongside a delighted Andrea de Cesaris, 10th after failing to qualify last time out. His teammate Pirro was an excellent 13th too, sandwiching the 2 Lamborghini-powered cars of Warwick and Bernard. Tarquini lined up 24th just behind Barilla, but Alex Caffey pipped Dalmas in the other AGS to the last grid slot by just 1/10. Yannick was joined on the sidelines by David Brabham and both Monteverdis, Wojtek the other driver not to improve on Friday after a second-hand wishbone snapped, as did Gregor, walking out of the team in frustration. The radiator on Senna's car cracked on his way round to the grid, so he would take the start in the spare, but otherwise everyone lined up without major problems, and away they went. Berger tried to go between the Williamses, but was squeezed out, going into the first turn in 3rd and coming out of it 2nd, while Senna had lost a place to Mansell and then dropped another to Alazi as they went into turn 2. So as they proceeded around the first lap, Boutsen led Berger with Patrese 3rd, Mansell 4th, Alazi 5th and Senna 6th, while de Cesaris had a great start and climbed up to 7th, past both Benettons during the lap 2. Prost, meanwhile, had a lot of work to do back in 9th. Mansell, who'd won from 12th last year, was pressuring Patrese already as they began the second lap, but as ever it was pretty difficult to pass on the Hungaroring, so he wasn't getting past just yet. Alio had an off-camera spin and came in for a new nose, getting going again far adrift at the back, while the leading 4 were drawing away from Alazi, who had Senna right behind him. Pundits had suggested before the race that the Pirelli Shod Tyrrell might prove a roadblock in the race if it started high enough up, and so far it looked like they might be right. In fact, Senna was also coming under threat from Nannini behind him, who'd got back past de Cesaris, while up front Mansell was beginning to lose touch with Patrese, so the race was starting to break up into separate knots of cars. De Cesaris now also dropped behind Prost, who was finally starting to make some progress, with Piquet next in his sights. The first casualty of the afternoon was Satoru Nakajima, whose brakes failed on lap 10, but he might have made it back to the pits if he hadn't mucked up his recovery, while teammate Alazi continued to stymie Ayrton Senna's attempts to get past. Boutsen was now leading through traffic, with Berger still stuck to his rear wing, as Mansell had caught back up to Patrese and was ready to pounce on any opportunities. Senna finally made it past Alazi on lap 20 and set off in pursuit of Mansell and the others, who had all closed up again, as Tarquini held Boutsen up for a lap or so, but the number 27 McLaren almost immediately picked up a puncher and had to make a tyre stop. It was shades of Germany, as a problem getting the left rear on held Ayrton up and dropped him back to 10th. About the same time de Cesaris' engine gave up, while Alio had another off-track excursion on the dusty, slippery surface. Senna got his head down and charged, setting a series of fastest laps. Mansell, meanwhile, was once again right behind Patrese and once again looking for somewhere to pass, with Nannini now dogging his wheels too. Mansell was clearly desperate to get past his old teammate and nearly made it stick with an outside pass on lap 36, but had to bail out and almost immediately came under attack from Nannini behind. Patrese was then able to interpose Pirro and Bernard between himself and Mansell, and as Nigel came past the pair, their private battle nearly took him out too. By now, it was half distance, and that was as far as Prost went, his gearbox locking up and spinning him out of 7th place, while on the same lap a lazy came a cropper lapping Martini, putting them both out and promoting Senna into 6th as he narrowly avoided being caught in the incident himself. And missed in all this excitement was Aguri Suzuki, pulling into the pit lane with his Lamborghini engine blazing merrily away behind him. As lap 40 of 77 began, it was still close at the front, with Berger hanging on to Boutsen and Patrese hanging on to both of them, then Mansell and Nannini scrapping away just behind. It was hammer and tongs stuff, all the top 5 drivers running close together and cancelling each other out. Mansell caught back up to Patrese again, and their battle became the best viewing, while all the time behind them, Senna was charging up in pursuit. Berger peeled in for new boots on lap 48, dropping to 6th behind his teammate after failing to get it in gear for a few seconds, which made it a Williams 1-2, at least for the moment, with Mansell determined to do something about that. Senna had also by now caught up, and when Mansell tried to pass Patrese and again had to bail out on lap 51, Nannini now had the momentum to try and pass the Ferrari, and soon Senna was diving for the gap too, as all 3 of them lapped Larini. Somehow nobody made contact, and Nannini had the place, and then Senna flung himself past, locking up his left front at the next corner. So Mansell had dropped from 3rd to 5th, while Nannini and Senna had charged up together to the rear of Patrase's Williams, and Berger was just 2 seconds behind Mansell and on a charge of his own. A couple of laps later, Nannini and Senna both went past Patrese in the same place they'd seen off Mansell, who tried to take advantage himself but was denied. So Boutsen led, with Nannini and Senna running together now 2nd and 3rd, with Patrese now clearly holding up Mansell and Berger. On lap 56, Patrese peeled in for new rubber, a trouble-free stop getting him back out 7th, but then he had a spin on cold tyres and dropped back to 8th, and commentators everywhere could finally draw breath and speculate about whether, with 20 laps to go, Thierry Boutsen would need to stop for tyres himself, and Capelli took the opportunity to get some TV exposure for the sponsors by parking up with the Dutt gearbox. But the breather wasn't a long one, because Boutsen had never been far ahead, and soon had Nannini, Senna, Mansell and Berger all queuing up in his mirrors, and more traffic in the form of Barilla ahead. Berger, whose tyres were much fresher than Mansell's, was getting impatient and had a go. No luck that time, but next time around lap 64, he took the place, only to slow on the exit, allowing Mansell to go round the outside and retake it. Just a few turns later, Senna dived down the inside of Nannini, wheel touched wheel, and the Benetton bounced into the air. Somehow, everyone else avoided the incident, and while Senna's car was somehow undamaged, Nannini came into the pits, but the damage was terminal and he was out, understandably miffed at losing what he must have thought was a real chance of a win. So the top 4 were all still together, now Boutsen, Senna, Mansell and Berger, with Piquet having quietly made his way up to 5th with a sticky throttle ahead of Patrese. On lap 72, Berger took a leaf out of his teammate's book, did exactly the same to Mansell at exactly the same place, and likewise continued merrily on his way, but only for a lap before he too rolled into the pits with suspension damage. All of which meant that with just 3 laps to go, Boutsen and Senna were still both very much in it for the win, while Piquet had somehow ascended to 3rd, with Patrese 4th, and Warwick and Bernard now up into the points. Boutsen must have been looking nervously in his mirrors after seeing both Nannini and Mansell torpedoed by McLarens, even if he and Ayrton were great friends off the track. Senna, for his part, must have been worried about his car holding together, but if so, he didn't show it, as he mercilessly hounded the Williams for the lead. Thierry Boutsen, widely rumoured to be driving for his Williams career, and perhaps conscious of his reputation of being too nice, was driving the race of his life now, passing Tarquini as the leaders entered the last lap. Senna was attached to the back of the Williams as if by string. The last corner, and Alboreto was in the way, but moved over just in time, and Boutsen planted his foot to the floor and took the win, his 3rd and his first in dry conditions, with Senna just a cigarette paper behind. 27 seconds later, Piquet came in a satisfied if rather bored 3rd, with Patrese a couple of seconds behind him. Derek Warwick and Eric Bernard took the last points, great news for the Lotus team and the Lamborghini firm, who had been rumoured to be running out of both cash and motivation, and Martin Donnelly was just outside the points in 7th too. There were actually 15 cars still running at the end, and with Mansell and Berger having gone far enough, there were 17 qualified finishers. Not bad for a gruelling race like Hungary. There would no doubt be words afterwards between the two McLaren drivers and their respective victims, especially Senna, who netted 6 points to go 10 clear in the championship. But Thierry Boutsen would head to his home race in 2 weeks' time, with a smile on his face, a new baby at home and 4th place in the championship, having staked his claim for continued employment by Williams in 1991 in no uncertain terms.
My helmet is blue and yellow, and that was the Swedish color. Because when I was young, my favorite driver was Ronnie Peterson, and I have the lucky to meet him. Also, I was a good friend, and I keep this color from my career.
I don't know. It was done 20 years ago. I have no idea.